We're in Bereshit, and the title of this shiur is called Disgrace to Redemption, How Judah Saved the World. How Judah Saved the World. This story pops up right in the middle of this Torah portion. I mean, right in the middle of Joseph and his many dreams and his brothers plotting to kill him at first, and then they decide to sell him to the traders that were coming through the area going to Egypt. And then the selling of him to Potiphar. And Potiphar takes him on, and he becomes sort of the head of Potiphar's household. A very interesting story of Joseph. But then right in the middle of it, we have the story of Judah and Tamar. The sages of blessed memory talk extensively about this text, that if you just read over the text, in which we will go over and sort of skim a few parts of it, but I will tell the story so we can understand it. If you read the text, you just think, okay, this is kind of a weird, quirky story. You know, Judah has sons, and the sons end up having some issues with spilling seed and death, and no child to be born. And you think, what's the point of this story? Is the point of the story the spilling of the seed? Is the point of the story some convoluted thing that we may not understand? But we have to also understand that in this idea of the text is a tremendous amount of disgrace that takes place amongst the sons. There's also rectification that takes place because of the judgment or punishment that God metes out to Judah and some of the other characters that we see. And what we find in the Midrash is really interesting subject matter that addresses very specific things that Judah went through directly relating to his participation with Joseph's eventual being traded and put into slavery, and his lie to his father, Yaakov. It says, at the time it happened, in verse 1, that Judah went down from his brothers and encamped near Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. Judah saw the daughter of the Canaanite there by the name of Shua. He married and cohabited with her. He conceived and bore a son. He named him Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and he named him Onan. And she bore still another son. She named him Shelah. He was in Chezib when she bore him, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, Er. Her name was Tamar. Er is Judah's firstborn, the evil before the Lord, and he did evil before the Lord and caused him to die. Judah said to Onan, go to your brother's wife and do your duty to her as a brother-in-law, and prove offspring for your brother. Onan knew that the offspring would not be called his name, so he then, when he cohabitated with his brother's wife, he corrupted his way upon the ground, so as not to raise offspring for his brother. And what he did was evil before the Lord. He also was caused to die. Tragedy after tragedy is taking place. Then Judah told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, sit as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he said he may also die like his brother. So Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house many days. And then we'll stop right there for a moment. Why in the midst of the account of Joseph's life do we find this story? Well, the sages of blessed memory clarify this by pointing out some very interesting things. Number one, the Torah, by inserting this chapter, gives us insight into Hashem's marvelous guidance of history. As we've learned throughout the patriarchs, in the midst of good decision, bad decision, conflict arising, we see that Hashem's steady calm, like a rudder of a ship, guiding the ship exactly where it should be. And in the midst of, for example, Lot and being pulled out of Sodom and Gomorrah, it is through this sort of incestuous relationship that takes place. We see the beginning of the kingly, or we know the Mashiach will come from that line. And but in reality, it is Hashem who guides history. We know that nothing really happens outside of our Creator. When we say the term God is one, Hashem is one, we truly mean that nothing exists outside of Him, His oneness. All the events end up coming out to His desire and grand plan. Even though it looks in the midst of physicality, chaotic, we understand that there's something beautiful that's being formed. The tribes were involved in Joseph's sale. Who are the tribes? Those were the brothers, correct? Joseph was immersed in mournful thought about his separation from his father. Reuven at that time is repenting. He's repenting over his participation in the destruction of some of the people in the nations who had taken his sister Dinah. Yaakov was mourning Joseph. Judah was getting married. And while all these events were taking place, Hashem was parting the light of Mashiach into the world. We're seeing that out of this chaotic situation and the story of disgrace comes redemption. Very much like the end of days, where the darker it gets, the more chaotic things get, then we're going to see the light of Mashiach come, and it is the light of Mashiach that will bring redemption into the world. And we see this pattern repeated over and over and over throughout the text. It was the sale of Joseph that ultimately precipitated the Egyptian exile. Prior to the first exile, though, Hashem wanted to set the stage for the final redemption by bringing life to life the ancestor of the final Mashiach. He brought about the union between Judah and Tamar in order that Peretz, the forefather of the destiny of David and ultimately of Mashiach, should be born. We see that Mashiach comes out of the boy's ancestry, especially this one from Peretz. Juxtaposed of the story of Joseph and Tamar intimates a parallel between Tamar and Potiphar's wife. It's a pretty interesting concept here. The story says that Potiphar's wife sought magicians and found out that she was going to be able to bear her ancestors, or from her lineage would be a royal line, and it would be from Joseph. The only thing, it wasn't going to be through her womb, it was going to be through the womb of her daughter. And so she was, for the sake of heaven, wanting to seduce Joseph, but we see that Judah ends up in the same situation with Tamar, because Tamar, for the sake of heaven, wants to bring about the royal line, and she can't because she hasn't born a child. Now, the two sons, one spilled his seed because he was concerned that his wife was going to turn ugly after she gave birth. No, true. Think about this. The other one decides, I'm not going to impregnate my brother's wife because she's not going to have a son that would bear my name, so what's the point? I'll just go through the motions. Both of these situations is rectification for Judah. Nothing goes without recognition, punishment, award. We have a concept in Judaism that says that God punishes or rewards what? Measure for measure. Judah is paid back in every detail for having suggested Joseph's sale, for having deceived his father. In fact, Tamar addresses Judah with the very same words he had used to speak to his father about Joseph. And these words come at the time when she's standing before the Beis Din, right? And this is what it said. She said, he said to Yaakov, recognize whether this is your son's garment, as he's passing Joseph's garment. Tamar, on the other hand, said to him, recognize who these objects belong to, the signet ring, the coat, and the staff. Measure for measure. So while measure for measure, reward and punishment takes place amongst the patriarchs, so is redemption being meted out and measured out by the Creator. When Yaakov's sons realized that their father would not accept consolation of Joseph's loss, they said, "It is all Judah's fault. We respected his advice and therefore did not kill Joseph when he was opposed to the idea. Had Judah told us not to sell him, we wouldn't have." So basically they put all the blame on poor Judah. Judah took himself a wife, the daughter of a merchant. Now it says in the text that she was a Adullamite, which would be a person from the Canaanite tribes. There's a problem with the text, or the problem with the idea here, is the patriarchs are forbidden to take a wife from the Canaanite people. The text seemed to point to the fact that it was not a Canaanite person, but a daughter of a merchant from the area. Now, one way or another, he did take a wife, and she was an Adullamite from that region. And it would have been the idea that he took a daughter of a merchant who had settled in the neighborhood, who was in the Canaanite area. Judah's wife bore him 3 children, and we talked about Onan, and Shailah. Judah's sons could have become the forebears of the king, for Judah was the royal tribe, but they chose otherwise. As we know, they decided that they weren't going to, for their own selfish reasons, were not going to be part of a royal line. We find out very quickly, in spite of what we do, God often does what he wants. Right? In spite of what we decide we want to do, Hashem will do what he needs to do. The pasuk in this is very interesting. Let me read a few lines of here. It states that Judah married the daughter of a Canaanite man. Rambam raises the issue that both Avraham and Yitzhak instructed their sons not to marry the native Canaanite woman. Yet the pasuk seems to imply that Judah married such a woman. For this reason, onkulos translates the word, which means Kenanai, means merchants, concerning the spouse of the rest of Yaakov's sons. The Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah 84:19 presents 2 views. It says, Rav Yehuda states, twin sisters were born together with the tribes, and they later married with them. Interesting. Also, according to Rav Yehuda, a view, we must assume that Yaakov's son did not marry their twin sisters of the same mother, which is forbidden according to Noahide laws. But each one married the twin sister of a different mother according to Noahide laws is permitted. Many marry a sister from the same father and a different mother, if that makes sense to you. So while Adam had served idols, he commanded Noah to eat flesh of a not to eat the flesh of a live animal. He commanded Abraham to circumcise himself. He commanded Yaakov to not eat the sciatic nerve of an animal. It says that Judah says he gave me the mitzvah of Yibum, which means Levirate marriage. If a man dies childless, his brother has the responsibility of helping that brother's wife have a child. That's the whole Levirate marriage idea. Later on, it's clarified in Torah law of the 613 laws. Onan agreed to take Tamar for a wife, and this is the explanation that we have from the Midrashic text. But he sinned like his brother and wasted seed. He was therefore punished by Hashem to die. Now, Judah was afraid to give Tamar to the youngest son, because he's thinking maybe she's the problem, not having known what the situation actually was, just assuming, well, if I had 2 boys die from the same woman, maybe there's a problem there, so I'm not going to let him marry. Tamar wished to bear children from the holy tribe of Judah, foreseeing prophetically that a great people would descend from between her union with Judah. She was really a righteous woman and acted wisely, motivated by intentions that were for the sake of heaven. She resorted to a plan to deceive Judah. She veiled herself and sat down. She was a very modest woman. The text says, or the Midrash says, that even while she was married to her husband, that Judah had never seen her face because she always kept her face covered. And so when they were there, he just wouldn't recognize her. Now, the next hard question comes, and Miss Sandy raised this question up last week, is that when she sat at the crossroads near Abraham's dwelling place, she was concerned because she knew a lot of people passed that way and didn't want to be pestered and wanted to make sure that Judah saw her. So she prayed out and asked for the sake of Hashem to not allow this situation to pass where the Zadik, Judah, would be empty-handed. And it says, when Judah passed the crossroad, he noticed this woman seeming fairly lowly. What do I mean lowly? A prostitute, and it would not behoove him to lower himself to be with a prostitute. But it said that Hashem's angel drew him to her. Hashem said, "From which union shall kings arise, if not from this one?" Pointing out to this person. From which their other union would be noble arise. Now, Judah did not recognize Tamar because she had, like I said, she had covered herself. According to Midrashic text, it says that he was asked, Judah asked her, "Are you a Gentile?" She says, "No, I've become a Jewess." And he answered, "Are you married?" She says, "Well, no." Has your father possibly destined you for another man? She, of course, said, "No, I'm an orphan." All of these things are very factual. She asked him, "What will you give me for coming to me? I shall send you a kid goat from the flock." Judah had deceived his father with what? A kid goat. All right? The blood. Right, exactly. He showed him Joseph's garment dipped in a goat's blood. Hashem therefore said, "I swear that you shall be deceived with a kid goat also." "Will you give me a pledge until then?" Tamar demanded. So basically she said, "Well, promise that you're going to bring the goat, so give me a pledge." So she asked for, I can't believe she got it either, but the signet ring, his staff, and cloak, which was also part of a marriage vow. This is what she's trying to get committed from him, that this is a marriage vow. She was not acting at this point like a woman of ill repute. She's now saying, "I want you to follow through and commit to this relationship." Well, it said that when he showed up with the goat, with the sheep or the goat, he couldn't find her because she stayed hidden from him. And stayed hidden from him for quite some time. And actually 3 months later, Judah is told that his daughter-in-law is now pregnant through the act of prostitution. So a Beis Din is called together, and this Beis Din consists of Yitzhak, Yaakov, and Judah. And they decided that Tamar had to be burned. Why did she need to be burned? Well, this is not some drastic thing here. We would think it sounds drastic according to modern day, but it wasn't illegal for a non-Jew to be a prostitute. It was, however, very illegal for a person who was in the Levitical tribes to participate in anything like this, and if they did, they should be put to death. So she is sentenced to death by fire. According to the Torah law, in Vayikra 21:9, her act constituted immorality equal to that of a married woman, since she was destined for another man, which would have been the younger son of Judah. Tamar could have publicized the fact that she was not guilty. She held her mouth. She didn't say anything. There's a wonderful story about a Zadik by the name of Mar Ukva, who gave charity on a regular basis. And he said it would be better to burn than to let your person who receives the charity know where it comes from. So what he would do is each day come by and slide it under the door of a very poor family. And the father of the household became curious, like, who is delivering this charity every week to my house? And so one day the guy of the household says, I'm going to be prepared. It's the same time every day. The next time I hear footsteps, I'm going to rush to the door and open it up. Well, it says that Mar Ukva goes to the yeshiva, decides to stay a little later at the house of study, and ends up going and being there just a little late. And as soon as he goes to put the staka under the door, he hears the door rattle, get ready to open. So he runs and hides real quickly inside this chimney. And when he hid inside the chimney, there was coals on the floor, and his feet were burned. But he said that he'd rather have his feet burned than to be seen by the person he's given charity to, which is a high level of righteousness, right? It's very important. We see this, and he learned this from the story of Tamar, who very clearly could have humiliated Judah in front of everybody, in front of the patriarchs, in front of his brothers. She chose not to do it. It's said that on the way to burning her, according to Midrashic sources, that she was able to sneak the ring and the staff and the cloak to someone in the group and said, please take this to the Beis Din and let them know that the person whom is the father is the owner of these things. Now remember this before. She says, recognize exactly the same words that Judah said to his father. When Judah saw the pledge, he felt really ashamed and wanted to deny it. Interesting thing. Anybody would have wanted to deny something like this. From a guy who's accusing her of prostitution and she should be put to death, comes this great disgrace and shame from saying, oh, I'm actually the one who did that. There was something very huge and amazing that took place when he admitted to this. It says, according to the sources, a heavenly voice came forth and proclaimed, it was by me that these events, saying Hashem, that these events were directed. She will be the ancestress of kings and prophets. I swear to you, Judah, just as you saved Tamar and the 2 children she carries from the fire, so shall I save the 3 of your descendants in Babylon, which we remember are what we'd call in the English Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So 3 of his descendants were saved when they were thrown in the fire. The name Judah contains all letters of Hashem's divine name, Yud-Che, Vav-Che. Because Judah performed a Kiddush Hashem, something very holy for the name of God, by admitting truth in the public, Tamar gave birth to twins. Now, what is the name of the 2 twins? Do we remember? Peretz, which means broke forth, and Zerach. Peretz meaning break forth, and Zerach, which means shining. So think about this. What a great explanation of understanding that in the midst of this chaos and disappointment and disgrace that took place in the family, from the trading or selling of Joseph, to the measure for measure rectification that had to take place because of their negative behavior, out from this breaks forth shining. This is the prophetic message of this text that teaches us that in the end of days, in which the Rebbe says that we're not at the footsteps of Mashiach any longer. He said this in the 80s. He said, we are far beyond the footsteps of Mashiach. We're already at the heels. We're already getting ready to burst forth. What is this about? That in the midst of the chaos, and we looked at the news this afternoon, and there's another mass shooting in California, 12, 14 people killed. Just a horrendous, chaotic environment, people making seemingly the most ignorant mistakes. what are we going to get out of that situation but a breaking forth of the light of Mashiach in the world? And when we realize that, we realize how powerful these texts are, because not only is it true for that time and a great story, but it's a great lesson for us today, that in the midst of all of our difficulties, just in the same way that Judah's mistakes and misgivings, he brought forth redemption, because the Messiah will come from this line, which seems to be a terrible mistake. And so in the conclusion of this shiur, I have to say that regardless of what we do as men and women who are attempting to be righteous before Hashem, we all make terrible mistakes. We all sin at some point. But in spite of our mistakes, the Creator has a purpose. And the Creator's purpose is to bring the light of Mashiach in the world. All we have to do is recognize that and become the light of Mashiach in the world today. That is a very powerful idea. And we're constantly reminded from the Kabbalists who teach that when we talk about Mashiach coming, that we shouldn't just talk about it. We shouldn't just chatter about it. We should perceive our life as if Mashiach is here already, meaning that we begin to embody redemption in itself and also begin to teach or embody that by sharing redemption with other people, that God has a purpose and a plan, and in that plan is to bring about the redemption of the nations and the Jewish people.